Good afternoon, colleagues and friends from across the world. I should say good morning, good afternoon and good evening, because we do have colleagues joining us today from across 4 continents, as far as we're aware, which is absolutely fantastic. My name is Tracy Morse. I am the head of the new Strathclyde Centre for Sustainable Development, and together with the co-directors, Professors Andrew Gowdy and Anya Lowett, I'd like to welcome you to this launch event. It's wonderful to see participants coming in today from not only academia, but also from industry, and from our partners in the third sector, and also from the Global North and Global South. The launch today is really to outline the mission and vision that we have for the centre and to let you know how you can engage with us in the future. And we want to focus today particularly on the perspectives of both our staff, our students and our external stakeholders. We're very delighted to welcome our keynote speaker today, Joyce Musea, who is the Assistant Secretary General and Deputy Executive Director of the United Nations Environment Programme. I know that Joyce is excited to engage with you all, particularly on the questions and answers, so we hope that you have them ready for her to post. You'll see at the bottom of your screen a Q&A box which you can click on. You can feel free to add any questions you have there pertaining to the centre, any of our speakers today, and we'll try to get to them as quickly as we can. So sustainable development is not a new thing to the University of Strathclyde, and we'd like to start today's event by handing over to the Vice-Chancellor and Principal, Professor Sir Jim McDonald, who will talk about where the Centre and Sustainable Development sit in the vision of Strathclyde University and how, as a university, we will support meeting the Sustainable Development Goals. So I will stop sharing my screen and hand over to you, Sir Jim.
And thank you very much, Tracy. And good afternoon, distinguished guests, friends, colleagues, our staff, our students, and to echo Tracy's comment to our international friends and partners, it's wonderful to have you here in what is a very important day for Strathclyde, and we'd like to think, very importantly, to enhance and give us more opportunity through collaboration and partnership with all of you to make a big impact. I'd also like to echo Tracy's very warm welcome to Joyce. Joyce, it's great to see you here again. We are very proud of you as a Strathclyde alum and demonstrated our pride by making you Alumna of the Year 2019, where you gave an inspiring speech to our graduating students, and it's wonderful to see you having such an important and influential role in such an important global challenge. But as we know, through those challenges, opportunities as well in terms of society, economy, and reimagining the world as we try to tackle the 17 challenges, as it were, through the UN Sustainable Development Goals. And of course, here we are at the launch date. This is something we've been working towards actually for a few years. My thanks in particular to Anya and to Andrew for their diligence in taking forward the ideas that we've been talking about and having them converge around the plan and the reality of launching this new centre today. Strathclyde, as many of you know, has been around for quite some time. We're moving into our 225th year of existence, having been the only higher education institution to be established in Scotland during the Scottish Enlightenment, and in many ways today represents that same spirit of challenge, of contribution, of connectivity to society, with sustainable development right in the heart of it. And whilst we pride ourselves in being a leading international technological university, that's through the work of what we do in humanities and social sciences, as well as in engineering, science and in business studies, and getting that converged approach to educating the leaders of tomorrow. We've got an excellent example of that shortly when Rue talks to you as part of our student executive, because engaging our students and capitalising and tapping into their energy is going to be critically important, because I always like the environment where I am challenged as a leader. And there's no better and constructive challenge than those that comes from our young people. And we've seen the influence that the youth around the globe have had in recent years as they've raised the stakes on the agenda around sustainability and environment and social responsibility. And Strathclyde wants to be a significant part of that international movement. So whilst we are around for 225 years, we still like to have that same spirit of contribution, innovation, and responsibility to move things forward. And you'll hear throughout the course of the next hour or so exactly where we are focusing our attention, because there are technological challenges as we go through energy transition, for example. We're seeing a redoubling of the efforts of the hydrocarbon industry, we hope now, to make that move over the next 30 years towards decarbonising their industry. Renewables, smart grids, electrification of transport, new built environment, but also bringing that with it the whole of the global community. So we have to make sure that infrastructure investments are fit for purpose, that we adopt and make sure that we are respectful of different cultures, about different requirements in terms of investment. And the work of the new Centre for Sustainable Development will seek to look at how we explore that space between policy, society, technology and science, and bring together a whole multidisciplinary approach, because there's nothing surer. As well as technology and infrastructure, sustainability is about that multicultural, multidimensional exchange, that respectful environment that we create, where we can really work together to challenge ourselves and challenge our political leaders to set in place the policies and to create the right investment environment where public and private sector partners can make the necessary investments over the coming decades. So today is really important because it's only about 6 months or so since we launched our new Vision 2025 strategy for the university, building on the past decade of success and growth. We have very explicit commitments to what our role is in terms of decarbonisation, in terms of sustainability, in terms of inclusivity, equality, diversity. And that inspiring mission is allowing us to find all new forms of dialogues with our students and with our partners. And there's an energy behind this between myself, my executive team, indeed the whole community, along with our governance activities, that this feels like a Strathclyde one team, focus around a can-do attitude. So I'm looking forward to getting behind this, and for Tracy, Anya and Andrew and the team to keep me focused on what's required to get behind them. But as you know, Strathclyde has I think a deserved reputation for very strong and productive relationships with business and industry. Our motto from some 200 plus years ago of useful learning epitomises what we're intending to do today. And we have a recognised, distinct set of collaborations with business and industry. And we need to work with them also. These are our friends, these are our partners. But many of our industrial sectors that we work with have particular challenges, whether it's in petrochemicals, whether it's in energy, whether it's in manufacturing. We need to work with them as they respond to a global challenge around ESG, as it's known, around environmental, sustainable and governance challenges. So as always, useful learning, I'm keen to see practical outputs from this centre, as well as being an attractor for collaboration, exchange, cooperative work in academia. I also want to see us channeling out our influences and also to capitalising on our exchanges. So in many ways, our partnerships with business and industry might give us a set of distinctive opportunities within this centre where we can help them on their journey towards addressing the ESG requirements that the investment community has of them increasingly, but also how they fit and respectfully work within society as it evolves. What's been really exciting for me over the past couple of years is just seeing the level of enthusiasm grow, because this Centre for Sustainable Development at Strathclyde has really acted as a beacon, and it's brought together our educators, our researchers, those that engage with translational research and innovation, those that inform policy making, and we've really had a gathering around this, some examples of which you'll hear about later. But our vertically integrated projects, for example, a model that was inspired by our friends at Georgia Tech, we've taken that and really given it a Strathclyde flavour, where we've added a degree of multidisciplinarity. We've given a great degree of autonomy to the students that engage with this, whether they're first years or experienced PhD students, whether they're academics in humanities or science or engineering, really setting the tone, setting the focus for these vertically integrated projects. And this activity has been recognised externally through the Green Gown Awards, and I'm enormously proud of my colleagues that have been driving that. And that is just one start to it. We want to embed the understanding of sustainability and sustainable development into our undergraduate programmes. Hear what our students have to say, co-create materials with our students, and then use that to engage with the external partnerships that we've talked about. The international dimension is absolutely critical, as well as working within Scotland and the UK. And I'm bound to say that, for example, the UK government is one of the largest countries that have signed up legally for the 2050 net zero carbon commitment. For example, the Scottish government pressing that harder to 2045. Our very own city of Glasgow. I was on a meeting with the leader of the Glasgow City Council only this morning, Susan Aitken, challenging the city to become net zero by 2030. It's that sort of leadership and vision and commitment and collaboration that will make things happen. Because 2050, for example, feels like a long way off, but I'm sure many of you understand that what we have to have is action now, well-informed action based on evidence, but fueled by the commitment, the experience and the passion of not only the young people that will engage with us, but the institutions and partnerships that will drive it forward. So through our international partnerships up until December last year, I was president of an entity called CESAR, which is a consortium of European universities of science and technology. I'm very privileged to do that. We've made many friends and partnerships there with our colleagues in Chalmers and KTH and beyond. And when I visited our friends there, for example, I took inspiration from what I saw them doing, the fantastic work that they have done to really embrace sustainability in their academic mission, and also our friends in Waterloo, for example, and many others. So I will say not much more, Tracy, other than to say, first of all, it's wonderful to have you back after your 20-year sabbatical in Waterloo, pushing forward the need for health and care activities in the communities there, fresh water, energy infrastructure, transport. You're an inspiration for me, Tracy, and I'm sure you'll be an outstanding leader for this entity. And with that, colleagues, once again, many thanks for being with us today, and I'll hand back to Tracy. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Vice-Chancellor. That's a great introduction to the fabulous work that's already going on at Strathclyde and that we want to build on with the centre. As Sir Jim touched upon, students and young people have a very key role to play in attaining the SDGs, and the centre wants to ensure that we look to engage with our student body extensively in all of our future work. So without further ado, I'd like to pass on to our next speaker, Rue Wallace. Rue is the Vice President for Community at the Strathclyde Students' Union and is going to talk to us about how the student body will be getting engaged and is already engaged in supporting the global achievement of the SDGs. Over to you, Rue.
Thank you so much, Tracy. I'll just share my screen. There we go. Hopefully that's showing up for you now. Right, thank you. Yeah, so Strathclyde Students' Union is the collective voice of all students at Strathclyde, from undergrads, postgrads, doctoral researchers, and part-time students, everyone, all students at Strathclyde. And we are so excited to be involved in the delivery of the Centre for Sustainable Development. Students are acutely aware of the global climate disaster that we're currently in, because it is a disaster, but it's one that we know how to fix. And it's going to take all corners of society working together, sharing knowledge and collaborating to reduce our carbon emissions, eliminate poverty and inequality, preserve our planet and its inhabitants. Students of all ages and stages in their education are in the prime position to be shaping the current international response and the future international response. And their time at Strathclyde should be spent getting prepared for this role, whether that's in our amazing facilities on campus or as they are now sitting at their kitchen table or in their bedroom on a Zoom call. These 17 goals that have been set by the UN and organisations are a blueprint to start the work that needs to be done to end poverty, inequality and solve the climate crisis. Students at Strathclyde are a cross-section of society covering all economic and all social classes. There's so many different backgrounds, ethnicities, cultures and outlooks, and many of them come from a place where they're disproportionately affected by these issues. They each have unique perspectives and valuable insights on the challenges and how to approach them. And together, the international student community can collaborate to find solutions and to develop methods of attaining these development goals. When I first met with Tracy about the centre, one of the first questions I asked was, what will the centre do for students? I think she was expecting it. I definitely wouldn't have been doing my job if I hadn't asked that question. But I think perhaps some of the biggest benefits come for research students in the Strathclyde Doctoral School. The centre will draw together various strings of work on sustainability that the university has had in action for years. It'll be able to act as a resource for researchers to access knowledge, data and experience across disciplines and across sectors to enhance their research. And it'll enable them to build relationships and to collaborate with other people who are passionate about sustainable development for years to come. When it comes to taught students, faculties and student reps involved with the union and the university's Strath Reps project for sustainability work can collaborate to create curricula which are centred around how each course can tackle these sustainable development goals, with sustainability, equality and climate justice always taken into account when developing these curricula. The centre will be an invaluable resource for this, and at Strath Union we are absolutely committed to decolonising the curriculum and leaning into sustainability. We've been involved for decades in environmental campaigning and sustainability, and so we're so keen to engage with the centre as much as possible as part of our efforts, to guide our efforts and to increase the scope of our activities and to make as big an impact as we can. Even many of our various clubs and societies will most likely benefit from the provision and knowledge and access that the centre makes available. To ensure that students gain the access, knowledge and experience to build a sustainable future, it's going to be necessary to embed these sustainable development goals into all aspects of education and research at Strathclyde. Research students will have access to an interdisciplinary network of academics, community leaders and thinkers. This will lead to great networking opportunities for the future and also current access to a huge range of resources and experience. For undergraduate and postgraduate taught students, having a curriculum with the values and challenges of the Sustainable Development Goals embedded in it, from the moment when they stumble out of Freshers' Week into their first lecture to the moment that they get handed their graduation certificate and onwards as alumni representing Strathclyde, that will mean they'll graduate fully prepared to be leaders in the global efforts for a sustainable future. They might enter Strathclyde with a knowledge of the global emergency that we see happening and perhaps the general anxiety that we all have caused by living in such uncertain times, but they'll leave Strathclyde with the ability, the connections and the motivation to fix these challenges and secure a better world for everyone. If there's one thing that practically every student I've met can agree on, it's that the future is looking uncertain, now more than ever before. Unemployment is at record levels, partly due to COVID-19, and the job market is really not the greatest place right now. On the flip side, however, as the world realizes how much work needs to be put into securing a future, a whole sector has opened up in the world of sustainability. Much smarter people than me have spent years discussing what future economy could and what it should look like. The truth is we don't fully know what it's going to turn out, other than it's going to drastically change. One thing we do know, though, is the world needs people to work at the front line of its efforts. People ready with the skills, the knowledge, and the networks to collaborate to fix these problems. With this Centre for Sustainable Development, Strathclyde can help students become these people and take a leading role in the field as a forum and as a resource for this ongoing work. Cross-disciplinary connections and engagement with a global network of sustainable organisations will make Strathclyde a breeding ground for committed, forward-thinking academics and students to change the face of the planet. Strathclyde is the place of youthful learning, and it might be a bit cheesy, but as far as I know, there isn't anything more useful than saving the world. Thanks.
Thank you, Roo, for that very inspiring and very optimistic look at the future and for the students as well, despite, as you said, the challenges and economic challenges that face us all going forward. That was really excellent. Thank you. We've noticed there's a couple of participants who have put their hands up. If you have got a question, if you can just add it into the Q&A box, that would be really helpful. And we can try and give you feedback to your question in there. Now, I would like to take the opportunity just to give you a bit more information about how the centre is going to operate within the university and how you can potentially engage with us as we go forward. So I think as Roo and the principal have very eloquently, and much more eloquently than I, touched upon, the universities really do have an extremely critical role to play in trying to attain the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. So not only are they the hub of knowledge and innovation, and the principal touched upon a number of excellent examples of innovation that Strathclyde have been involved in there, and we participate and lead in collaborative work and collaborative projects across academia and with our industrial partners. But also we are the people who teach and develop the future generations of sustainability experts. And we need to ensure, as Roo said, that these students and graduates are well equipped with the competencies that they need to help tackle these very challenging problems. At the centre, we recognise that the SDGs are interdependent and synergistic, and that makes them particularly complex and wicked challenges that we need to face. We need to look at that from an interdisciplinary and, where possible, transdisciplinary perspective. And that is more evident than ever as we look at how we face the challenges from the COVID-19 pandemic, both currently and as we move into the future. So with that in mind, the mission of our centre is to ensure that the principles of sustainable development are embedded across everything that we do within the university. So we've touched upon the issues of teaching and learning, research, knowledge sharing, and also our operational activities. The centre will be based in the heart of all 4 faculties and our operational activities as well, to ensure that we can support that embedding process. Will be a hub from which we can help to support sustainable integration. We want to make sure that we have cross-disciplinary working, not only internally, but also across with our partners as well, to develop, I think that the principal used the term fit for purpose, and as I would always say, context appropriate solutions for whoever we are trying to support. So whether that's high, middle or low income countries, because we want to achieve ultimately real world impact. Our mission's underpinned by our guiding principles, which are on our website that launched today, and I'll give you the link for that in a couple of slides. And they're outlined in much more detail there. I'd welcome you to go and have a look at them. Please give us feedback on those. Are there areas that you think we might be missing, for example? I'd like to give some examples of those guiding principles today that we think are particularly important. In keeping with the UN principles of no one being left behind, for example, we want to prioritise work that focuses on those that are most vulnerable, no matter where they are. And we want to ensure that we build those competencies not only in the student body that Roo touched upon, but also within our staff and our partners to ensure that we truly are developing global citizens. We'll build on our excellent work that we already have with industry and with the Global South, and look to extend that work further through equitable and inclusive partnerships and using ethical partnership practices. And very importantly, we want to develop and promote a culture of sharing. We're very good at sharing successes, but we also want to ensure that we share our challenges and also when things go wrong as well, so that we can move the agenda forward. And lastly, as Roo has touched upon, we want to make sure that we engage young people wherever possible and our student body throughout all of the activities of the centre as well. We've put the activities into 5 key categories. Just like the SDGs, these are not in isolation, but are also very interdependent. But just to touch upon examples under each of these headings. Within education, I think Roo has touched upon this as well, that we want to ensure that sustainability is embedded across all the curriculum and working with the student bodies and partners to ensure that's happening well. The principal already touched upon the vertically integrated projects for sustainable development, which is an excellent example of work that we do at Strathclyde. And you can learn more about that at one of our webinars that we'll be holding next Tuesday on the 6th of October. In terms of research, we want to ensure that wherever possible, research is SDG focused and related. And we want to support that interdisciplinary and transdisciplinary work where we engage with the beneficiaries or end users of the innovations and interventions that we develop. The One Ocean Hub is an excellent example of the work that we do at Strathclyde in that area already. And again, plugging webinars. Next Friday, we'll have a webinar from the One Ocean Hub team, which you can participate in. We'll also be looking to develop a Centre for Doctoral Training within the centre, which will support PhD candidates who want to focus on those cross-cutting issues across SDGs, or look at linkages between SDGs and how we can tackle those. We appreciate that we need capacity building, not only in our own staff and students, but also with external partners too. These will be initially focused on those sustainability competencies around issues such as equitable and ethical partnerships, governance, and public engagement. And again, we would welcome to hear from you as staff at the university or our external and international partners, where you think we should focus there and where we can work on those together. Which leads me into our international partnerships. We have excellent partnerships already throughout the world, and we'll be looking to improve on those, engage further in collaborations. And lastly, research is not useful unless we are sharing it with the non-academic community as well. So we'll be helping to support our academics to translate their research into non-academic audiences to ensure that it helps to support policy and practice in the future. Last, just to say, I would be delighted to focus and engage with you in any range of these SDG related issues. We look forward to hearing from you and engaging with you in the future. So lastly, just a little plug again on the webinar series, which forms part of this launch week for us. We have 6 webinars coming up starting tomorrow with a team from our electrical and electronic engineering department led by Keith Bell, which will look at if we can meet people's needs for electricity without burning fossil fuels. So I hope that you have either registered for this already, or following this launch, you'll receive another email with links where you can join those webinars. Following on next week, Sir Harry Burns will have a webinar on Monday, which will focus on the biological and social basis of inequality in health and well-being. And he will then be followed by the VIP Programme for Sustainable Development with Scott Strachan and Stephen Marshall. It's, as the principal mentioned, an award-winning programme and very interesting to listen to about. Roddy Ure will talk about our operational activities within the university and led by Strathclyde, which are looking at a whole systems approach to deliver at-scale climate action projects, and particularly focused on the Glasgow City Innovation District. And then on Friday, the One Ocean Hub will have a roundtable discussion about building bridges for the oceans and looking particularly at transdisciplinary research for development. And lastly, on the Monday the 12th, we'll have Professor Jennifer Davidson, again with a roundtable discussion, looking at inspiring children's futures, particularly in light of the impact of COVID-19 on child health and well-being in the future. All of these webinars will take place between 1 and 2:30 British Standard Time. And as I said, you'll get a link out further. So it just remains for me to say that we will very much welcome you to come and engage with us, even if it's just to have an informal chat about how we can potentially work together and collaborate either through our research, education, knowledge sharing, or our operational activities in the university. And we very much look forward to being in touch with you and working with you in the future. I'd now like to hand you over to the co-directors, Professors Andrew Gowdy and Anya Lowett, who will introduce our wonderful keynote speaker for today, Joyce Msuya. Thanks very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Tracy. As the principal and Tracy have both highlighted, the vision of the new centre is firmly grounded in the United Nations Agenda 2030 and in the Sustainable Development Goals. Since the adoption of the new agenda at the Sustainable Development Summit in September 2015, which, as you will know, was in itself an amazing achievement signed by the 193 member states of the UN has done a great job in mobilizing the global community to respond. Given the scale of the global challenges that we face, our contribution at Strathclyde will always be relatively modest, but we are clear that we want our university to contribute maximally towards this global vision, addressing the huge challenges that we see both in the higher and in the lower income countries. It is perfect today that we have such a distinguished speaker from United Nations to help us launch the new Strathclyde Centre, indeed one of the top leadership of the UN with an immense global responsibility. I'm therefore delighted to welcome Joyce Messire as our special guest of honour. This is indeed a great honour for the university and for our new centre. As the principal said, Joyce is the United Nations Assistant Secretary General and Deputy Executive Director of the United Nations Environment Programme, based in Nairobi, Kenya, but today I think she's talking to us from Washington, DC. I'm sure she will say more of her role shortly, but the UN Environment Programme is the leading global environment authority that sets the global environmental agenda, and it promotes the implementation of the environmental dimension of sustainable development within the United Nations system. Its mission is to provide leadership and encourage partnership in caring for the environment by inspiring, informing, and enabling nations and peoples to improve their quality of life without compromising that of future generations. Joyce was appointed by the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres in May 2018. She is a qualified microbiologist and environmental scientist. She holds a Master of Science in Microbiology and Immunology from the University of Ottawa, and much more importantly, of course, a Bachelor of Science in Biochemistry and Immunology from our own university, the University of Strathclyde, from which she graduated in 1992. After graduating from Ottawa, Joyce worked for a short while as an international health policy analyst at the University of British Columbia, researching in public health policy before joining the World Bank Group in Washington in 1998 as a health specialist, working mostly in the Africa region. Since then, she has built up more than 20 years extensive experience in the field of international development, notably with respect to international economic and environmental strategy, operations, knowledge management and partnerships across Africa, Asia, and Latin America. Most recently, prior to joining the UN Environment Programme, Joyce served as advisor to the World Bank's Vice President for East Asia and the Pacific region. Finally, but by no means least, as the principal noted earlier, Joyce was named the University of Strathclyde's Alumna of the Year in 2019. Joyce is going to speak to us for about 30 or 40 minutes, after which we shall have around 20 to 30 minutes for Q&A. The Q&A will be chaired by my colleague and fellow director, Anya Lowett, and any questions that you would like to put to Joyce can be submitted into the Q&A box at any time from now on. I know that Joyce is very happy to answer as many questions as she possibly can in the available time. Joyce, thank you so much for being with us, and over to you.
Thank you very much, Professor Andrew Gowdy. And let me start my keynote address by expressing deepest thanks to Professor Sir Jim MacDonald, Principal and Vice Chancellor, to the co-directors of the Center, Professor Andrew Gowdy and Anya Lowett, Tracy Morsi, congratulations for the honor to actually lead this center. And let me also recognize the Strathclyde University students and Rue Wallace, who spoke so eloquently about the partnership between students and the center. All the participants, good afternoon, good morning, good evening, depending on where you are, ladies and gentlemen. To speak with you today is a double honor for me. Not only have I dedicated my entire life to sustainable development, but it was my time as a student at Strathclyde University that equipped me with the skills and knowledge that have allowed me to do so. To celebrate the opening of an institute with such a profound mission, and to do so as a former student, is a tremendous honor. I sort of have to pinch myself. In many ways, it feels like yesterday that I embarked on my Scottish journey. I remember vividly the airplane ride, the train ride, the first time I had set foot outside my home in Tanzania. And I remember arriving at the railway station in Glasgow, when Glasgow was the European City of Culture, where I was about to start my studies at Strathclyde University. My time at the university would deeply affect me. In my 3 years there, Strathclyde became my door to the world, a catalyst for my curiosity of humanity, science, and the planet, and an incubator of long-term friendships. It also led to a deep appreciation of men in kilts, whiskey, and haggis. Seriously though, the university fed my curiosity of the world, giving me the insights and knowledge that shaped my ambition to build a career in international civil service. After graduating in 1992, as Professor Gowdy mentioned, I studied microbiology and immunology in Canada before joining the World Bank Group in Washington, DC. I have worked in the field of sustainable development ever since, and I have the university to thank for much of this. The vision of the university's founder, Professor John Anderson, that the university be a place of, and I quote him, useful learning, was very much alive in my early years of career. In my student days, and more so even now as I reflect around my journey. And today, as we open a trailblazing center that will address some of the most pressing issues of our time, it is clear that this vision lives on. The Sustainable Development Goals represent the highest ideals that humanity has set itself. To see the university not only commit to them, but to actively participate in their fulfillment makes me immensely proud to be associated with this seat of learning. I would like to zero in for a moment on the phrase sustainable development. It is a phrase that we hear more and more about, and yet it is easy to lose sight of what it really means. The term was coined a few years before I left home for Glasgow in a report issued by the World Commission on Environment and Development. The authors defined sustainable development as, and I quote, development that meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs, end of quote. The heart of this idea is perhaps most beautifully and succinctly summed up in a favorite quote of mine. We do not inherit the earth from our ancestors. We borrow it from our children, end of quote. That this quote is attributed to the Maasai people in Kenya and Tanzania, indigenous peoples in America, and a series of famous environmentalists show how deeply this interpretation of sustainability resonates across cultures. And so, the world of sustainable development is very much about the business of ensuring that our children and future generations inherit an earth that is, at the bare minimum, no worse off than the one we inherited. It is perhaps one of the noblest and highest aspirations that we can set ourselves as humans. And I believe it should guide everything we do as a species. It is why the Sustainable Development Goals, or SDGs, are so important to me. These targets, adopted by UN member states 5 years ago, provide humanity with a roadmap for a better future. Taken together, they offer a bold and beautiful vision for our shared future, a future in which hundreds of millions of people no longer go to bed hungry every day, where poverty no longer harms 1 in 10 people, and where quality education and lifelong learning opportunities are available to all. The heartbreaking reality is that we are failing to follow this roadmap. In other words, we are failing to implement this vision of a better world. By the end of 2019, the world's efforts to achieve the 17 Sustainable Development Goals were already off track. Then the COVID-19 pandemic struck, triggering an unprecedented global crisis that is severely restricting our ability to meet many of the goals. The crisis, like most emergencies, is hitting the world's poorest and most marginalized the hardest. More than 70 million people are estimated to sink back into extreme poverty in 2020, the first rise in global poverty since 1998. School closures have kept 90% of students worldwide out of school. The pressure on families is intense. Jobs are being lost and incomes cut. Domestic violence against women and children is surging as a result. The disruption to health and vaccination services and the limited access to food have the potential to cause hundreds of thousands of additional deaths among children under the age of 5. Like I say, we were already struggling to meet the SDGs before the pandemic struck. Climate change and the collapse of the living world are happening much faster than expected. The consequences are being felt around the world. This year, wildfires in America, Australia, Europe, and Siberia have broken records for their ferocity. In recent months, flooding in South Asia has forced more than 25 million people to abandon their homes. And we know that the worst is still to come. More floods, more drought, more extreme weather, and we know what this means. More hunger, more poverty, more conflict. And just as we are failing to meet the SDGs, we are also failing to hit the climate and biodiversity targets that we have set ourselves. 5 years ago, the world's nations met in Paris and vowed to keep the rise in global temperatures to well below 2 degrees Celsius. But the pledges they made remain woefully inadequate. And even if these pledges are met, the world will still warm by more than 3 degrees Celsius. A temperature rise of this magnitude would condemn hundreds of millions, perhaps billions, more people to suffering. And this year marks another sad milestone in the battle to halt the destruction of the natural world. We have just learned that we have failed to meet a single one of the 20 biodiversity targets that the world set itself a decade ago, the Aichi targets. Land degradation and habitat destruction continue at a rapid pace, driven by unsustainable patterns of consumption and production. About 1 million species are at risk of extinction, some within decades. We are rapidly destroying our only life support system. The troubling indicators that I have mentioned and others like it threaten to undermine the strongly held belief that humanity is progressing. Certainly, before the COVID crisis, our economies were growing, and some of the key indicators by which we measure human progress were also improving. Maternal and child health, access to electricity, the representation of women in government, to name just a few. But if the very bedrock of existence, the very foundation of life is being destroyed at the same time, then what does this say about the progress we are making? For me, this cuts to the very heart of what we mean when we talk about sustainable development. It is also the reason why the environment is directly connected to more than half of all the SDGs. The natural world underpins so many of the key indicators by which we measure human well-being. For me, it is simple. If we want human well-being to improve, then we must begin to see the environment for what it is, one of the cornerstones of sustainable development. This is why the United Nations is urgently calling on governments to put the environment at the heart of their COVID recovery plans. The tragedy triggered by the pandemic presents the world with an incredible opportunity to build back better. Whether governments can seize this moment remains to be seen. I'm worried. Green measures currently account for less than 0.2% of the total COVID-related stimulus spending that is being allocated by the world's 50 largest economies. It is clear that much more needs to be done before policymakers, business leaders, and members of the public understand the need to prioritize sustainable development. And this is where education and science play such a vital role as catalysts for action. Academic institutions must double their efforts to ensure that the world's policymakers and leaders are provided with the information they need to solve the world's increasingly complex development problems. To achieve this, it is crucial that universities, policymakers, and donors increase support for academic research that is guided by the 2030 Agenda. Current research priorities will also need to be shifted to support innovative approaches in sustainability science, specifically ones that emphasize cross-disciplinary partnerships, like the one Tracy has talked about as part of the Center's programs. And more resources must be committed to supporting scientific institutions, particularly in the Global South. Academic institutions also have a tremendous responsibility to create a generation of policymakers, scientists, and innovators who understand the importance of placing sustainable development at the heart of its work. Ensuring this happens requires universities and schools to embed the concept of sustainable development throughout their curricula. It is also a case of leading by example. University campuses must continue their drive towards decarbonization, decoupling, and de-investment, inspiring their students to engage with the climate crisis and issues of sustainability. Behavioral science shows that a simple nudge towards everyday greener decisions is a powerful spur to the environmental action for students and staff. Techniques such as gentle persuasion, how we frame our choices, resetting default options, and social influence can all lead towards sustainable behavior. To this end, the United Nations Environment Programme launched the Little Book of Green Nudges at the virtual World Academic Summit on 1st of September 2020. I am delighted that the University of Strathclyde has already signed up as a pilot campus. That education plays a major role in ensuring we meet the SDGs is not news to any of you. The university has already done so much to enhance the pursuit of sustainable development. It has signed the SDG Accord, a commitment from institutes of learning to deliver the sustainable development goals by embedding them into their education, research, and leadership programs. And the university has already committed to declaring a climate emergency, recognizing the urgent need for a drastic societal shift to combat the growing threat of climate change. It has also gone a step further by setting a carbon neutrality date of 2040, making it a beacon of hope and inspiration for others. It is clear that the university understands the planetary crisis in which we find ourselves. By establishing the Center for Sustainable Development, the university is underlying its commitment to many of the highest ideals humankind is capable of. It is proof of the university's vision and it could not come at a better time given the scale, urgency, and complexity of the interconnected crises that we face today. I want to commend and thank the university and all the staff who made this happen, and students who made this happen, for displaying the courage and vision to confront some of the most pressing issues that we as a species have ever faced. We stand at the beginning of a new decade. This must be the decade that we finally deliver on the promises of sustainable development. At the UN, we are mobilizing all sectors of society for a decade of action on the SDGs. This will require global action to secure greater leadership, more resources, and smarter solutions, local action from governments and local authorities to embed sustainable development in everything they do, and people action to ensure that civil society, academia, the media, the private sector generate an unstoppable movement that can push for the transformations we urgently need. These transformations will require changes to all aspects of society at a scale and speed that is unprecedented in human history. Whenever I'm daunted by the enormity of the work that lies ahead of all of us, I recall a quote from Archbishop Desmond Tutu, who said, and I quote, "Do your little bit of good where you are. It's those little bits of good put together that overwhelm the world," end of quote. As an individual, I find those words deeply inspiring, that my actions in concert with others have the power to transform the world. And then I look at the efforts of this university that shaped me, that molded me, and it fills me with enormous hope for the future. You're doing more than just a little bit of good. May the example you are setting here today ensure that other academic institutions follow your lead. May the work you do in the years to come enlighten our decision-making, and in doing so, ensure that the earth we have borrowed from our children is returned in good condition. Let the good we do together overwhelm the world. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Joyce, for that insightful and thought-provoking presentation. We now have time for some questions and some discussion with Joyce. So please, just as a reminder, please do submit your questions through the question and answer function. I have a few questions already, but we'll try and answer as many of your questions as we can. I'd like to start the question and answer session with some questions that were submitted by one of our own students, Louise Thompson, who's studying environmental entrepreneurship at Strathclyde. And Louise's first question was, in your opinion, Joyce, would you say that COVID has provided an opportunity to put the world on a more sustainable path?
Sorry, can you repeat the question? It's on Q&A.
So she's saying, in your opinion, would you say that COVID provided an opportunity to put the world on a more sustainable path?
Thank you, Tracy. I think it's fair. Sorry, it's actually not Tracy, it's Anya, so I do apologize. I think COVID-19 has provided us with three opportunities. One is the pause effect. If you look at most of our cities, transportation patterns, we've had to take a pause to actually reflect. I mean, I live in Nairobi, and it was very interesting and sad in a way, in many ways from a humanitarian perspective, but when the pandemic hit, all of a sudden from Nairobi, we could see Mount Kenya and Mount Kilimanjaro. And that was a reflection of less pollution from the cars because nobody was going to work. So one is the realization of what is possible when we all stop and or use other ways of working. I think the second, and we published a study back in June on the links between zoonotics and nature. It's an emerging issue. The question still remains, are we encroaching the nature? And are we coming too close to viruses? Are we acting as vectors to generate new types of viruses? And that is an emerging scientific discipline that is still being, the links between nature, viruses, the links between environment and health and economic development. Where the opportunity lies, but recognizing that COVID-19 is still a humanitarian issue for most countries, people are losing jobs, etc., is actually on the green stimulus packages. Most of the countries will have to rebuild, reconstruct, and policymakers have options, whether we go green or we go business as usual. And that's where the opportunity lies. I think what COVID-19 has also taught us is the interconnectedness of the world. The whole world has stopped, and the socioeconomic strata that we knew before, whether it's the low income, middle income, upper, have all had to pause. I think three is, that's why I'm really excited about this center, is the interdisciplinary nature of environmental issues, health issues, and economic issues. And again, there is a real opportunity at whatever level to actually pursue multidimensional approaches to addressing solutions. So the answer is yes, but also we should recognize for many part, the pandemic is still very much a humanitarian issue. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Joyce. Maybe some related questions to this. There's one question asking you if you could tell us a bit more about the green nudges and how we will be encouraging them at Strathclyde and through our partners through the centre, so kind of focusing on more on the environmental sustainability there.
Thank you very much. So Green Nudges is such an exciting initiative from UNEP, the organization that I have a privilege of serving. We, as an environment, as Professor Gowdy mentioned, as the highest global environment authority, we've always worked with the normal, what I would call the normal stakeholders, policymakers, CSOs, private sector, etc. About 2-3 years ago, we established a special program, Education and Environment. And we have, this is one of our very dynamic, innovative program. And basically it's exploring how can we work best with academic institutions, how can we influence the content, the design of curriculum, for example, to actually embed the environmental issues in the context of sustainable development goals. How can campuses act as incubators or guinea pigs of some of climate change mitigation adaptation approaches? So we launched the Green Nudges book. It's actually on our website. I'll be more than happy to send you a link if you have not seen it. And different academic institutions can actually sign up. For example, we have a number of universities, Strathclyde has committed to actually support this initiative. But we have, for example, universities from Kenya, from Thailand, from California, that are doing very simple things that are focusing on behavioral changes on campus that can actually help to address environmental challenges. What do I mean? One, for example, is banning the use of plastic straws, converting trash cans into more sustainable trash cans rather than using plastics, for example, or having motion censored lights in classrooms in the spirit of saving energy, transitioning into renewable energy. So it's a very exciting opportunity. I would highly encourage all the participants to read more about it, but equally, if not more important, to be active in actually giving us ideas. Universities are known to be incubators of innovation and knowledge and future leaders. So if you have a brilliant idea, especially as generation Z or Z, depending on which country you come from, you should challenge the oldies like me in bureaucracies to actually be modern. So I look forward to sharing the information with you, Anja, and then you can pass it on to the participants. But it is on our website, unenvironmentprogram.org. Thanks.
That's fantastic, thanks. I think it's quite encouraging to hear that you feel that even small actions will have a bigger effect, because I think sometimes we feel quite overwhelmed and thinking the little thing that we can do might not have a big impact, but that's good, that's the thinking at the moment. A related question, kind of thinking about how does the sustainability feed in with societal sustainability. So we have a question here saying, it's often said that a healthy economy requires a healthy society, and a healthy society requires a healthy environment. This would suggest that the environment underpins everything and that there can be no trade-offs. Have you got any further thoughts on that?
So, I would answer the question based on my own experience. I get a lot of questions. How did my biochemistry and immunology background from Strathclyde, coupled with microbiology and immunology from Ottawa and development, has come together? So this question is around economy, society, and environment. I think a more interesting question, in my view, is actually how are these interconnected? For me, it's not a question of either or. The question really is how, I think as Fiona and Professor and Andrew mentioned previously, is actually looking at how can societies use sustainable development goals to actually address everything that encompasses society, economy, and environmental issues. What I have seen in every place I have worked in or lived, and I've lived in places like China, Korea, Africa, North America, the three are interconnected, and it does not discriminate whether one is higher income or low income. I mean, a specific example, if you are in a village in Africa, if the trees are cut and farmers cannot get their yields because a climate change from across the border has caused drought or rain, the society gets affected, the bottom line economy gets affected, and the environment gets affected. I think we all know, for example, environmental issues, as I keep on saying, they don't require passports to cross geographical borders. So what that means is actually, how can the countries and collective action come together to address the issues that affect the society? For me, what I have found extremely exciting about working in UNEP environment is actually, it's about people. It's environment. We have a say in UNEP for planet and for people. So the two are not mutually exclusive. They're actually two sides of the same coin, from what I have seen. When I lived in some of the developed countries in Asia, and per capita income was quite high compared, say, to my own country in Tanzania. But when there was pollution that came from coal, it affected everybody, whether the person was a billionaire or a villager in a farm. So I think what is exciting about this particular center at Strathclyde is looking at these issues and the interconnectedness, interdisciplinary nature, bringing the research, bringing the science to help inform policy actions. And that's the way I would answer that question.
Thank you, Joyce. Moving on to looking at national governments, obviously the UN has shown some very inspiring leadership in pooling commitments for the SDGs, but the national governments are under increasing pressure for insularity and problems at home solving those, especially in the current financial situation that we've incurred through the pandemic. So the question here is, how can our national activities stimulate greater domestic commitment to collective global action, particularly in the face of the growing, increasingly poor institutions?
The beauty of global institutions, universities included, but also the United Nations, is the combination of global and local. I think one of the previous panelists spoke about solutions have to take into consideration the context, yeah, because the context matters. I think for me, whatever global commitments, and let's look at Paris Agreement, but also let's look at SDGs. Those were the global ideals and framework to address the issues, but the action always happens at the national level. So what can be done? I mean, there are multitude, it varies because there's no one size fit all. As we know, some countries have federation. So you have a national government, but also you have subnational government. But others, you have more of a unified government. But I think what is fair to say, and I really liked what Sir Jim mentioned, for example, out of this webinar, you have business, you have CSOs, you have students. One is partnership. I think every part of the society at the national and subnational level has a role to play. As a citizen, for example, you can make different choices. When you look at the drivers, the triggers behind unsustainable production and consumption, it boils down to us as individuals. Do I buy a plastic straw? Do I buy a metal straw? Do I recycle? Do I not recycle? Do I use organic food or do I use heavily pesticide in my agriculture? So one is the individual responsibilities. I think the governments definitely have a role to play in setting out the regulatory framework. Let me give you an example. I keep on giving this example. With my job, I travel a lot all over the world. And I remember one time I was in Amsterdam, going back to Nairobi and buying some hand cream at a store. And the lady said, can I look at your boarding pass? And I thought, yeah, maybe it's because of the tax-free benefit that I was going to get from a L'Occitane hand lotion. So she took the boarding pass and she said, you're going to Nairobi. I cannot give you a plastic bag with your purchase. And I said, oh, really? So I was curious because I knew in Nairobi, they don't allow plastic bags. And I was curious, how did a policy passed by a Kenyan parliament in Kenya is actually having effect in Amsterdam? So the shopkeeper told me it was actually a directive that now is being implemented internationally, but driven by a policy action that the government of Kenya take. What is the message here? That goes to show the power of regulatory and policy action from policymakers. But policymakers like data, like science, and that's where academic institutions come in. How do you provide science? How do you show a minister of finance or planning that by solving a pollution problem, you're actually addressing a demographics issue that will affect your economy 5-10 years from now? And that's where the interdisciplinary interconnectedness research comes into play. And then you have the private sector. For most countries, they are the most, the biggest employers in terms of jobs creation, with few exceptions. So you cannot address the issue of plastic bags, I'm using the example of Kenya, if you're not engaging with the plastic bags manufacturers on Mombasa Road in Nairobi. So the point is, you need everybody at the country level, but you also need, we all know, political economy matters. And what Paris Climate Agreement moment showed us, once you have all the heads of states, or same with SDGs, come together and they say, this is where we want the world to go, then it's easier for the countries to move in that direction. Thanks.
We've also had a number of questions coming in about the climate summit that is going to happen next year here in Glasgow. And I'm sure lots of other universities, civil societies, companies are all thinking about what activities they can put on, but obviously not everybody is going to get into the main session and will have any influence on the decisions that are being taken. So can you tell us a little bit about, from a UN perspective, if there's sort of any specific plans to get the discussions back on track? And again, besides the actions that you already told we can take at local level, if there's anything else that we can do to support that?
I would like to propose 3 ways. I think it's very clear the COP26 in Glasgow, and very exciting time for Glasgow, by the way. There's quite a lot of expectations, considering how lagging the whole world is when it comes, for example, to NDCs development at the country level, and or unfortunately with COVID-19, we will probably see less budgets going into some of these sectors because there are more pressing sectors of saving lives and people's jobs. So I think what can people do? One is keeping the momentum and reminding we as citizens, we have the power of our voice and votes. So depending where you are, politicians respond to voters, as we know. So it's actually making your voice heard that this matters, that despite the short-term challenges that have come from COVID-19, we should not lose sight of the long-term challenges like climate change. I mean, we have seen in 2020 some of the hottest summers in the world across the globe. So let's use some of these very real examples that politicians, individuals, villagers, and others can relate to. I think 2 is communication. What excites me, I'm a mother of 2 young adults, and one of them is in college. But if I look at how my daughter communicates, and they use social media to actually increase awareness of some of the issues that matter to their generation, that is one area I think, and very powerful, that young people, university students, but also academic institutions can leverage. Now the world is interconnected. There are twinning arrangements. Strathclyde can talk to another and combine with a network of other academic institutions in the South, again, to increase the momentum and give different types of tools. I think lastly, I would say partnerships. Environmental issues, particularly climate change, requires all hands on the deck. So whether that means it's your neighbor, whether it means it's your politician or your professor, NGOs joining hands and say, what are the local initiatives that we can do to help address our community? Charity starts at home. So what can you do in your home, meaning a village or community, to actually make a difference? How can you move into a greener lifestyle? I'm in Washington, DC, and I keep on reminding my 16-year-old son, we need to recycle these things. We need to buy glass rather than plastic. So these are the choices that as a community, as individuals, we can actually influence. But more importantly, is pushing the policymakers through collective action. Thanks.
Part of your answers kind of led us quite nicely to another type of question, which is more on education and raising awareness amongst our young people. So this is a question from one of our students saying, in most schools it is currently compulsory to study a language or a religious education class. Is there any way the UN can put pressure on the government to introduce a mandatory environmental class? The student believes that there's a lack of awareness and or emphasis on the importance regarding the subject within the education currently.
Thank you. Good question from a student. So one is, I would tell that student he or she should aspire to join the United Nations. I spent 20 years at the World Bank Group, and now I'm with another elephant of bureaucracies. These types of multilateral organizations, they are very good for advocacy, for providing science. For example, UNEP providing science to help policymakers make sound decisions. One of our flagship products is the Global Environmental Outlook, which actually looks a few years out to say what are the biggest changes. But we do have limitations, and one of which is actually pushing the governments to do what governments are supposed to do. So something mandatory to push, say, through different governments, I think that is not within our guardrails, let me put it that way. But what we can do, and we do it very well, is advocating. If you look at our campaign on plastics, marine litter, if you look at how the some of the beaches are being affected by microplastics. We are providing evidence to help the governments make mandatory. Two, we are highlighting good stories. I talk about the nudges. We have now a list of universities that are doing things very, very easy, so others can say, oh, it's not as difficult as I thought. I think three is we use our convening power. The United Nations General Assembly is just wrapping up in New York. Under normal circumstances, all the heads of states will be in New York meeting and talking about the issues of today and tomorrow. Environmental would be one. But I'm also, I'm an eternal optimist. And I think the fact that you have, for example, Strathclyde leadership and professors that care about environmental issues, and they embed environmental issues in their curriculum and research, that's what gives me hope. When I went to Strathclyde University in 1989, frankly, the level of awareness that exists today was not there. The social media, the TikToks and whatever the young generation do very well to connect was not there. So I think what is more exciting, in addition to a mandatory environment curriculum, is actually the simple actions that we can do and the simple advocacy that we can do. But in terms of what can we do to push mandatory, unfortunately, even the United Nations has its own limitations. But we can have that offline discussion some other time.
And possibly a related question, not so much on student education, but looking at companies. So a question from Jill Scott saying, it's just disappeared from my list. This is typical, things move just when I'm looking for it. Here we are. Do you think there are opportunities to incorporate sustainable development goals into more enhanced corporate transparency requirements?
Absolutely, absolutely. The answer is yes. I mean, if you look at most environmental problems and sustainable development goals, I mean, I'm simplifying, but they have a supply and demand side. What we have found in UNEP, for example, just recently we worked with an alliance of corporations that are working in the mining sector to develop tailing standards. So where we can influence is actually using our science, our normative work to help corporations establish standards to guide sustainable production options for the companies. But that, again, it took a number of years, a lot of investments from UNEP staff, a lot of conversations and discussions and disagreements with corporations. But, you know, we saw progress. I think the beauty for me about sustainable development goals is the fact that they provide a menu of options for all stakeholders to actually do something. That is the big difference between MDGs and SDGs. The private sector can look at the 17 goals and say, aha, this is where I can contribute. If you look at the SDGs, actually after they were born, the UN came up with the UN Global Compact, where companies across the globe, Unilever, for example, is one, where they signed up and say, we are going to be champions for sustainable development goals. So that space for corporations to engage was created as a result of SDGs, but not just corporations, civil society, youth. We work a lot with indigenous communities. For example, you can't address issues related to deforestation or nature-based solutions if you don't talk to indigenous communities. So yes, we are working with corporations, but I hope we see the bigger picture, which is everybody has a role to play, and the SDGs provide a menu of options and opportunities for all of us to tap into.
Great. So I think we've probably come to the end of our time now that we have for the questions, but I know lots of other people have sent questions in, and we will try and get some answer for everybody if we can, but hopefully some questions were kind of on similar topics, so I'm hoping that most people's questions have been answered. So I'm just going to very briefly
And my final speech, I see some people are interested in my speech. I'll be more than happy to share with the center. I used to be a speech writer, so I really love writing speeches that are meaningful. And Strathclyde also helped my writing skills, so I'll be more than happy to share the final version with Tracy after the session.
That would be fantastic. It would be a really valuable resource to have. Thanks for that offer, Joyce. So that leaves me to thank everybody, all our presenters, and particularly Joyce, for the valuable contributions to our launch today. Thanks also to our audience that has stayed with us. I hope today's programme was of interest to you and that you will engage with us in the future to make the Centre a success in tackling the Sustainable Development Goals together, both locally as well as across the whole world. And it was really encouraging to see the breadth and the multinational nature of the participants today, and your enthusiastic and supportive messages that you've sent us, the interesting questions that you've sent us. And as I said, in many of the answers, we will try and engage with you future, because there were some fantastic ideas, suggestions that were raised today. Just a quick reminder of our follow-on program, and of course now, there we go, screen doesn't work. So as Tracy has already announced, we do have a webinar series that's trying to showcase some of the work that we're doing at the university over the next week. And you will have been sent an email again with the link to log into this, but you can also find the link if you can't find your email on our website under the engagement tab. And please keep an eye on that space as well in future, because we will have lots of other activities and events happening over the next few months. You can also contact us by emailing Tracy, and we'll put you on the mailing list just to make sure that you don't miss any of those. So thank you very, very much again to Joyce and everybody else, and we'll hope to engage more with you in future. Thank you.
Thank you for having me. Thank you. Bye-bye.